Jake trudged into the lobby of the Grand Starlight Zenith Hotel, his jumpsuit bearing the marks of his profession, grease stains, frayed cuffs, and a name patch barely hanging on. His toolbox, scratched and dented, was tucked under his arm, a silent testament to years of hard work. He was bone-tired, having spent the last 18 hours repairing a freighter on the nearby docks. All he wanted was to check in, grab a hot meal, and collapse into a bed. At the front desk stood Zuertach, a Xantherian with glimmering teal skin, elongated limbs, and a smug expression that exuded superiority. Zuertach's crystalline eyes scanned the lobby, landing on Jake with a thinly veiled sneer. Jake approached the desk, smiling politely. "I've got a reservation under Jake Morgan," he said, his voice calm but weary. Zuertach tilted his head, his tendrils twitching in what could only be interpreted as disdain. "Are you certain?" "This establishment caters to an exclusive clientele," he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Jake raised an eyebrow. "Pretty sure. Could you check?" Zyrth sighed theatrically, tapping at the holographic terminal. He glanced at Jake again, taking in the worn jumpsuit and the toolbox, and let out a derisive laugh. "Ah, I see. This must be some sort of mistake. We don't typically accommodate workers from the docks. Perhaps the hostel down the street would be more suited to your needs." Jake's lips twitched, but he kept his composure. "I'm here on business. I've got a confirmed reservation." Zuertach leaned forward, his voice dropping to a mock whisper. "I don't think you understand. Our guests have standards. They don't appreciate the smell of engine grease wafting through the air. It's bad for ambience, you see." A few alien guests lounging in the lobby chuckled softly, clearly enjoying the spectacle. Jake glanced around, noting the extravagant decor, gleaming floors, cascading crystal chandeliers, and walls adorned with rare intergalactic art. It was the kind of place designed to impress, and Zyrth played his role as gatekeeper with relish. Jake sighed. "Look, I'm not here to cause trouble. Just check my reservation, please." Zuertach straightened, feigning seriousness as he pretended to search the system. After a moment, he shook his head. "Nope, nothing here. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have real guests to attend to." Jake's jaw tightened, but he stayed calm. "Real guests, huh?" He glanced around the lobby again, his eyes catching on a flickering light panel and a service drone stuck in a corner, spinning its wheels uselessly. He made a mental note of each detail, his mechanic's instincts kicking in despite his exhaustion. "Is there a manager I could speak with?" Jake asked, keeping his tone polite. Zuertach rolled his eyes. "The manager doesn't have time for people like you." Jake smirked faintly, leaning on the counter. "You sure about that?" Zyrth scoffed. "Positive." Jake straightened, nodding slightly. "All right. Let's see how this plays out." He stepped back, folding his arms as he watched Zuertach, a calm expression masking the gears turning in his mind. Jake stood quietly, observing the receptionist as Zyrth continued to prioritize other guests, most of whom exuded the kind of wealth and extravagance that matched the Starlight Zenith's reputation. Each interaction was punctuated with overly polished pleasantries, dripping with insincerity. When Zuertach wasn't fawning over a guest, he threw the occasional glance at Jake, ensuring the mechanic remained aware of his supposed place. The disdain was palpable, and Jake couldn't help but find it amusing in a bitter sort of way. Another guest arrived, an aristocratic alien with shimmering gold skin and a cluster of floating orbs that trailed behind her. She barely acknowledged Jake, her attention fixed on Zuertach, who straightened immediately and offered a grandiose bow. "Ah, Lady Jaren. Welcome back to the Zenith," Zuertach said, his voice an exaggerated mixture of reverence and charm. "Who is that?" she asked, her gaze briefly flickering toward Jake, who leaned casually against a pillar, toolbox still in hand. "Oh, just a dock worker who wandered in," Zuertach replied, loud enough for everyone nearby to hear. "Apparently, he thinks this is the kind of place where you can show up covered in grime and expect to be served. Can you imagine?" The comment earned a round of laughter from the crowd gathering in the lounge area. Jake felt their eyes on him, sizing him up as though he were some peculiar artifact. He met their stares evenly, his calm demeanor unshaken. Zyrth, emboldened by the audience, pressed further. "I'm certain he's just lost. Perhaps he mistook this for one of those repair shops he frequents. Poor guy must be confused." Jake tilted his head, his gaze steady on Zora. "You're awfully sure of yourself, aren't you?" Zora grinned smugly. "Confidence is a key skill in hospitality. Something you wouldn't understand." Jake's lips quirked into a small smile. "Hospitality, huh? Seems like you're not very good at it." The remark drew a few surprised murmurs from the audience, but Zwart brushed it off, waving a hand dismissively. "And what would you know about running an establishment like this? Fixing ships doesn't exactly qualify you to critique the finer points of luxury service." Jake shrugged. "You'd be surprised what I know." Zwart leaned closer, lowering his voice to a conspiratorial whisper. "If you're looking for work, we don't hire mechanics. Try the service entrance." Jake chuckled softly. "Work? No, I'm just here to enjoy the place." That remark drew another round of snickers from the nearby guests. Zwart smirked triumphantly, basking in the validation. "Enjoy it? With what credits? Judging by that jumpsuit, I'd guess you'd need about a decade's worth of paychecks just to afford a drink here." Jake looked at the opulent chandelier hanging above them, then at the malfunctioning service drone still struggling in the corner. "Seems like this place could use someone who actually knows how to fix things." Zwart frowned, his bravado faltering for just a moment. "What's that supposed to mean?" Jake gave a small shrug. "Nothing much. Just that a fancy exterior doesn't mean much if the foundation's falling apart." Zwart scoffed, regaining his composure. "We don't need unsolicited advice from people like you." Jake smiled faintly, his gaze steady. "We'll see." He leaned back, crossing his arms as Zwart returned to entertaining his audience, blissfully unaware of what was coming next. As the laughter died down, the steady click of approaching footsteps echoed through the lobby. All eyes turned toward the source, and an older alien with mottled gray skin and sharp, discerning eyes emerged from a side corridor. His tailored uniform bore the insignia of the hotel's upper management, and the moment he entered, the energy in the room shifted. "Mr. Morgan," the manager exclaimed, his voice warm and welcoming as he strode directly toward Jake. "What a pleasure to see you again, sir." The room fell silent. Zwart froze, his confident facade cracking as he glanced between Jake and the manager. The gathered guests exchanged confused looks, their curiosity growing by the second. Jake straightened, offering a small nod. "Dravik, good to see you. Thought I'd drop by and see how things were running." Dravik's expression shifted slightly as he took in Jake's attire and the toolbox by his side. He gave a subtle, knowing smile before turning to Zwart, who now looked distinctly uncomfortable. "Ah, I trust Mr. Morgan's check-in process has been smooth?" Dravik asked, his tone polite but carrying an unmistakable edge. Zwart stammered, his earlier bravado evaporating. I didn't realize. There must have been some kind of mistake." "There's no mistake," Dravik interrupted, his voice calm but firm. "Mr. Morgan is the owner of this establishment." The revelation landed like a thunderclap. Gasps rippled through the room as the once amused guests now regarded Jake with wide-eyed astonishment. Zwart's teal complexion paled, his crystalline eyes darting frantically as he processed the information. Jake let the silence linger for a moment before speaking, his tone even. "You seemed pretty sure I didn't belong here." Zorn opened his mouth, but no words came out. He floundered, his arrogance now replaced with panic. I didn't mean any disrespect. I had no idea." "No, you didn't," Jake said, his voice calm but carrying weight. "You judged me based on what I look like, what I do for a living. You didn't even bother to check the reservation. That's not how this place is supposed to operate." Dravik stepped in, his tone sharper now. "Our policy is to treat every guest with respect, regardless of their appearance or profession." "You failed to uphold that standard, Zwart." Zwarta's tendrils drooped, his entire demeanor that of a creature cornered. "It won't happen again," he mumbled, his arrogance fully deflated. Jake raised a hand, stopping Dravik from continuing. "I'm not here to humiliate anyone. But I do want to make sure this place is running the way it should. So here's the deal." He gestured toward the flickering light panel and the stranded service drone. "There are some things that need fixing around here. Why don't you give Zwart a chance to get his hands dirty? Let him see what it's like to solve a problem instead of standing behind a desk all day." Dravik hesitated, clearly caught between maintaining professionalism and suppressing a grin. That seems like a reasonable idea. Zorta's eyes widened in horror. You want me to fix things? Jake's gaze remained steady. That's right. I'll walk you through it. Consider it a learning opportunity. The gathered crowd, now thoroughly entertained by the unfolding drama, exchanged amused glances. Zyrth, realizing he had no choice, reluctantly nodded. All right, Jake said, his tone lighter now. Let's get to work. He picked up his toolbox and gestured for Zyrth to follow, leaving behind a lobby full of astonished onlookers and a manager silently applauding the turn of events. Jake led Zyrth to the malfunctioning service drone first. It sat in the corner, spinning its wheels in futility, its navigation system clearly out of alignment. The Xantherian receptionist stood stiffly, his long limbs awkward and unsure of what to do. All right, Jake said, setting his toolbox down. First step is identifying the problem. Take a look at it. What do you see? Zyrth blinked, staring at the machine as if it might bite him. It's broken, he said finally. Jake smirked. Great observation. Any idea how it's broken? Zyrth hesitated, his tendrils twitching nervously. It's not moving correctly. Jake sighed, opening the toolbox. Close enough. Its navigation system is fried. Probably a loose connection. Here. He handed Zyrth a small tool. Pop the panel open and check the wiring. Zyrth stared at the tool as if it were an alien artifact. Me. Jake raised an eyebrow. You wanted to judge people who fix things, right? Here's your chance to see what it's like. Grumbling under his breath, Zyrth crouched awkwardly beside the drone and began fumbling with the panel. His elongated fingers were clearly not suited for precise work, and after a few frustrating attempts, he managed to pry it open. There, Jake said, leaning over to point. See that loose wire? That's your culprit. Reconnect it. Zyrth muttered something inaudible but did as instructed. When the wire clicked into place, the drone immediately stopped spinning and righted itself, its systems humming back to life. It's fixed, Zyrth said, his voice tinged with disbelief. Not bad for your first try, Jake said with a grin. Now, let's tackle that flickering light panel. The two moved to the wall where the light panel buzzed intermittently. Jake explained the process as they worked, walking Zyrth through checking the power supply and replacing a faulty capacitor. Zyrth's initial frustration began to give way to a begrudging sense of accomplishment as the light stabilized under their efforts. See, Jake said, packing up his tools. Not so easy, is it? Zyrth straightened, his usual air of superiority replaced by something more subdued. No, he admitted quietly. It's not. Jake nodded. Every job has value, Zyrth. Whether you're behind a desk or fixing a drone, it all matters. Places like this only function because people put in the work to keep them running. Zyrth glanced at the repaired drone, then at the now steady light panel. For a moment, he said nothing, his tendrils curling inward in thought. Finally, he turned to Jake and inclined his head. I apologize. I was wrong to treat you the way I did. Jake smiled faintly. Apology accepted. Just remember, judging someone by how they look or what they do doesn't reflect well on you or this place. As they returned to the lobby, the gathered guests and staff watched with newfound respect. Jake nodded to Dravik, who gave him a small, approving smile. Zyrth, visibly humbled, resumed his position at the front desk, this time greeting every guest with genuine politeness. Jake, satisfied with the outcome, headed to his suite, toolbox in hand, ready to finally relax. As he settled into the luxurious room, he couldn't help but chuckle. Life had a funny way of leveling the playing field, and today, he had ensured that lesson wouldn't be forgotten anytime soon.